I'm Laura Trevelyan at the United Nations here in New York City, and this is BBC World News America. President Biden makes his debut in front of world leaders at the UN, promising a new era of relentless diplomacy to replace...
We'll stand up for our allies and our friends and oppose attempts by stronger countries to dominate weaker ones. But we're not seeking, say it again, we are not seeking a new Cold War.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has been speaking to the BBC about Afghanistan, laying out what the Taliban need to do before he'll recognise their government. Plus, the lava flowing in Spain's Canary Islands from the volcanic eruption destroys more homes, forcing people to flee. Welcome to World News America on PBS and around the globe. Here at the United Nations, it's the opening day of the general debate, and more than 100 world leaders are here in person after the pandemic made last year's gathering a virtual one. The UN Secretary-General is warning that the world is facing cascading crises, from climate to COVID, calling on leaders to wake up and work together. President Biden, who's left some US allies feeling bruised by the chaotic exit from Afghanistan and by the new security deal with Australia, used his speech to promise that the US will work with partners to confront the globe's most pressing problems. BBC's Barbara Plett-Usher is here in New York and starts our coverage.
His Excellency Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States.
This was President Biden's chance to show that America is back at the table.
We stand, in my view, at an inflection point in history.
He called for unity to face growing global threats at a time when many allies are skeptical about America's leadership, especially after his largely unilateral decision to withdraw from Afghanistan.
We've ended 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan. And as we close this period of relentless war, we're opening a new era of relentless diplomacy.
A constant theme was U.S. tensions with China, framed as a defense of democracy versus autocracy, although he never called Beijing out by name.
We are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocs. The United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreements in other areas, because we'll all suffer the consequences of our failure.
Mr. Biden's debut was seen as a test of American credibility after the confrontational years of Donald Trump, and by that standard, he offered reassurance.
As we look ahead, we will lead. We will lead on all the greatest challenges of our time, from COVID to climate, peace and security, human dignity and human rights, but we will not go alone.
This is an opportunity for a reset, but U.S. action on COVID and climate change will be crucial for convincing the world that America really is back. Barbara Plett-Usher, BBC News, New York.
Well, as Barbara was saying there, President Biden claims that America's back, and he has pledged to double the US funding to help developing countries combat the effects of climate change and reduce polluting emissions. But even so, behind closed doors here at the UN, allies are asking whether the Biden administration is really committed to working with them or just telling them what to do. For more, I spoke to Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General of NATO. I began by asking him if terror groups could once again flourish in Afghanistan now the US has withdrawn.
Also, our mission in Afghanistan has not been in vain, because our main goal has been to prevent Afghanistan being a safe haven for international terrorists. For 20 years there have been no terrorist attack against any NATO ally organized from Afghanistan. We will of course do whatever we can to maintain that gain, partly by holding the new Afghan government responsible for what they have promised to prevent Afghanistan being a launching pad for international terrorist organizations, but also by making it clear that the NATO allies, the United States and other allies, are ready to strike from a distance against terrorist groups in Afghanistan.
So you're hopeful that over the horizon can really work, that you don't need actual boots on the ground in Afghanistan to combat terrorism?
Well, it works in many other countries. There are many countries where we are fighting international terrorism without having thousands of troops on the ground. Of course, we have less leverage when we don't have boots on the ground, but that doesn't mean that we have zero tools and no leverage at all.
As you know, the French, a key NATO power, are absolutely furious about this new US, UK, Australian defence deal. Was that a bit of a shock to you? Are the French right to call it a stab in the back?
So I'm not surprised about the fact that France is disappointed.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, but at the same time, what we also know is that allies agree on the big picture, on the main message, and that is that NATO has to work more closely with our partners in the Asia Pacific, including Australia. We agreed that at the summit in June this year, because we see a global shifting balance of power, we see the rise of China, we see many other challenges. That makes it even more important that we work closely with a close partner as Australia.
What if the French were to say withdraw from the military command of NATO, which they only joined in 2009? Could that happen?
Also, I'm confident that those allies involved in this disagreement, they will find a way forward, and that Europe and North America will continue to stand together in NATO, because when we face more challenges, a more dangerous world, it's even more important that we stand together in NATO, North America and Europe.
President Biden declared in front of world leaders today that he doesn't seek a new Cold War, but do you see one, with China growing as a military power, with the risk of confrontation in the South China Sea and other places?
China is not an adversary or an enemy, and we need to engage with China on issues like climate, like arms control. At the same time, the rise of China has security consequences for NATO, the second largest defense budget in the world, the largest navy in the world already, and a more assertive behavior, not least in the South China Sea. And we also see that China is coming closer to us in cyberspace, investing heavily in infrastructure in Europe. So all this matters for NATO, and therefore we need to address also that challenge together.
As NATO Secretary General, you have to worry about so many threats. What do you see as the evolving one that keeps you up at night?
First of all, I'm able to sleep at night.
Good.
Second, I think the main challenge is that we are faced with such complex challenges many different challenges at the same time. I grew up during the Cold War. Then it was one big, well-defined threat. That was the Soviet Union. Now there are so many. We have cyber, we have terrorists, we have more global competition, we have the rise of China, we see a more aggressive Russia. So we have all this together, and therefore the only thing we know is that as long as we stand together, as long as we are united, North America and Europe, then we are safe, regardless of what will be the next crisis.
And that was the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg speaking to me a short time ago. Well, the state of Afghanistan, now the US is out and the Taliban are in charge, is a big topic here this week. Pakistan is a neighbour of Afghanistan, and Prime Minister Imran Khan says preventing Afghan women from being educated would be un-Islamic. Speaking to our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, Mr. Khan laid out the conditions under which Pakistan would recognise the new Taliban government.
In Peshawar, on Pakistan's northwest frontier, Afghanistan feels very close. The streets are thronged with Afghan refugees. In the 1990s, the Taliban had their origins in the Afghan refugee camps here, and Pakistan has always been accused of setting up the Taliban and helping them take power in Afghanistan, something Pakistan denies. But when the Taliban were thrown out in 2001, Pakistan's influence in Afghanistan fizzled out for 20 years. In our interview, Imran Khan clearly didn't want to seem to be too close to the Taliban, but he was careful not to be too critical of them either, over the question of the rights of Afghan women, for instance.
The women are very strong. I feel give them time and they will assert their rights.
How much time? Years?
A year, 2 years, 3 years. At the moment,
3 years.
But at the moment, John, it's just too early to say anything, because it's just barely been a month after 20 years of civil war. They have come back into power.
The Taliban, the word just means Islamic students, originally owed their existence as a movement to religious schools in Pakistan like this one, the Zubaria in Peshawar, where they were recruited and radicalized. The main teacher, Sheikh Rahimullah, even helped the Taliban to distribute the weapons they captured from American soldiers. The previous Taliban government didn't understand the system, he says. This time they do understand politics and international relations. They aren't as harsh now as they were before. The new Taliban leaders in Afghanistan are certainly trying to give the outside world the impression that they've changed. Imran Khan hopes they have.
It's very encouraging. They have said they will have an inclusive government. They have said women can work, can have education. They will give amnesty to everyone. The soil won't be used for terrorism by anyone. These are encouraging statements.
So you're approving the way the Taliban are operating?
No, I'm approving of what they have said. No one can tell where Afghanistan goes from here. But what we hope and pray that finally after 40 years, the people of Afghanistan will have peace and stability.
But the Taliban didn't bring peace and stability before, and there's no evidence they can do it this time. In that case, it wouldn't just be Afghanistan that suffered, it'd be Pakistan as well. John Simpson, BBC News, Islamabad.
To news on the other side of the world now, and another village on the Canary island of La Palma has been evacuated because of the ongoing eruption of a volcano and the flow of lava to the sea. The evacuation of El Paso was ordered after lava started flowing from a new area of the volcano. More than 6,000 people have fled the area and hundreds of homes have been destroyed. Our correspondent Dan Johnson reports now from La Palma.
On La Palma's volcanic hillsides, it's time to move. More families and more communities are packing up and getting out. I don't even know where to take my things, this woman says. The village is being cleared in a last dash for people to grab whatever they can.
The flames and the lava are really close. That's why there's such a risk to these properties and why people are making every effort to get out. Being here for just a couple of minutes, you get a sense of the risk because there's ash falling on my clothes. I can taste it in the air, and the whole time there's the thunderous rumble of the volcano in the background. So that is why people are loading up and going.
But leaving is painful, and there's a sense of panic here at times. Basilio's desperately helping his dad Antonio, who's lived here for over 40 years. He can't believe it's ending like this.
I am angry with the authorities. We could have done this without so much stress, without running. I don't know where I'm going to live. And now what?
This is what? More homes destroyed, more communities that will have to be abandoned. And here's the molten lava that's on the move, a slow-motion menace, inching relentlessly downhill. This is a live geology lesson in nature's unstoppable forces. And it's not just property. Everything here is being shaken. Dan Johnson, BBC News, La Palma.
You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wins a third term, but falls short of securing a majority in Parliament. We'll have the latest. Officials in Sudan say a coup attempt was foiled overnight and the officers behind it have been arrested. The authorities have blamed this and previous coup attempts on factions loyal to the country's former president. The BBC's Catherine Biaruhanga has more.
The first signs that people in Khartoum saw of the developing situation in the city was the military deployment. There were armoured vehicles in Khartoum and soldiers on the streets. And since then, we had the statement on national television in which the army said that it had foiled an attempted coup. But the political situation in Khartoum in Sudan is very dynamic. You have competing factions within the military itself. You have a transitional government between the army and civilians. There really pronounced tensions between the two groups. And within the civilian political parties, you have tensions there. Now, this is a very fraught transition process. You have different actors involved. And so really this coup attempt could come from many different sides.
Now to Canada, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party will form the next government after the country's second general election in under 2 years was held on Monday. Conservative opposition leader Erin O'Toole has conceded defeat. But in a blow to the Prime Minister, his administration will still be a minority one. Our North America correspondent Samira Hussein reports now from Montreal.
In his third consecutive election win, Justin Trudeau greets his supporters as the Prime Minister of Canada. But this win was far from guaranteed, and at times his future as leader looked uncertain.
I hear you when you say that you just want to get back to the things you love, not worry about this pandemic or about an election. That you just want to know that your members of Parliament of all stripes will have your back through this crisis and beyond.
This is a victory for Justin Trudeau, who managed to hold on to his position as Prime Minister. But he was unable to deliver on the parliamentary majority that he so desperately wanted. And it will inevitably lead many Canadians to wonder why they went to the polls in the first place.
Mr. Trudeau, how are you feeling? It's a beautiful day to go vote. I encourage everyone to get out there.
Justin Trudeau, the man born with a silver spoon in his mouth, wanted to be seen as a man of the people, standing in line to vote like everyone else. He cast his ballot in an election he called that many Canadians did not want. Opposition leader Erin O'Toole tried to use that to his advantage, openly criticizing Mr. Trudeau's decision to drag Canadians to the polls. He ran a centrist campaign, hoping to turn disaffected Liberal voters into Conservative ones.
5 weeks ago, Mr. Trudeau asked for a majority. He said the minority parliament was, quote, unworkable. But tonight, Canadians did not give Mr. Trudeau the majority mandate he wanted. In fact, Canadians sent him back with another minority at the cost of $600 million and deeper divisions in our great country.
It may be a new day in Canada, but people here have barely taken notice. It is the same old leadership. 6 weeks of campaigning, and very little has actually changed. Samira Hussein, BBC News, Montreal.
Well, the US Department of Homeland Security will investigate reports that Haitian migrants have been abused by American border guards on horseback. Images and videos posted online appear to show US guards intimidating those attempting to cross from Mexico. Around 13,000 migrants who've made it into the US are now living in a makeshift camp in the Texan border town of Del Rio. Will Grant reports from Mexico.
It may well become the defining image of the migrant crisis on the US-Mexico border. Border Patrol officers mounted on horseback, forcing back Haitian migrants with whips. The scenes have caused genuine shock and anger, with activists calling the officers' actions the latest in decades of police abuses against black people in America. The Biden administration has said it will investigate, with the White House spokeswoman calling the images horrible to watch.
I don't have the full context. I can't imagine what context would make that appropriate, but I don't have additional details. And certainly, I don't have additional context. April, I don't think anyone seeing that footage would think it was acceptable or appropriate.
Yet while condemning the incidents on the one hand, the Biden administration is also warning Haitian and other migrants not to attempt to reach the makeshift camp at Del Rio in Texas. For days, thousands of mainly Haitian migrants have been sheltering beneath a bridge in the US border town. Now, the Homeland Security Secretary has underlined that they will be deported.
We are very concerned that Haitians who are taking this irregular migration path are receiving false information that the border is open or that temporary protected status is available.
Some, however, are already facing that reality. Many say they weren't even told where they were being taken when they were put onto the planes. On arriving back in Haiti, they find themselves in a country they left years ago, which is in the grip of its worst economic crisis in years amid coronavirus and spiralling gang violence. Many will no doubt attempt to leave again as soon as they get a chance. Will Grant, BBC News, Mexico.
Now, the United Nations General Assembly is always marked by a flurry of diplomatic activity and lots of comings and goings by world leaders. Take President Biden, who was here in New York this morning for his speech, and now he's back in Washington for a meeting with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the White House. Joining us now from there is our North America editor, John Sopel. And John, President Biden is promising this new era of relentless diplomacy. Is that reassuring to anxious allies like, for example, Boris Johnson, who was a bit blindsided by that hasty exit from Afghanistan?
Well, I think that what Joe Biden has said today will bring 2 cheers, if not the full 3, because I think that allies of the US were blindsided by what happened in Afghanistan and frankly horrified at the lack of consultation and that any advice that was given was completely ignored. And so when Joe Biden stands up and says, as he did, that America is going to work closely with its partners and it values its allies and it's not going to act alone, the proof in the pudding seems to have been Afghanistan, when America did exactly that. They acted alone and ignored the wishes of others. So, look, there are other areas where Joe Biden has done things which, you know, people like Boris Johnson, who's in there at the moment, will applaud to the rafters, like the additional money that the US is pledging to tackle climate change. And the words that he's saying about NATO and multilateral institutions are very different from Donald Trump. So on that score, there's a lot of support for Joe Biden. But some of the actions that have been taken, and the French particularly angry over this UK, Australia, US submarine thing, that is, again, something where the French would say Joe Biden is acting alone and not impetuously.
And John, when it comes to China, President Biden didn't directly mention China, but he said he's not seeking a new Cold War. Is that the defining foreign policy issue now in front of us?
Well, I think if you go back to what I was just talking about, this deal that was done between the UK, Australia and the US, that is all about China. That is all about facing the defence challenges posed by a much more assertive government in Beijing. And so for that reason, I think that Joe Biden is saying, look, Afghanistan, it was not of strategic importance. China is. Now, although he didn't mention China by name, he talked about the need to tackle authoritarianism wherever it is. And I think that was entirely aimed at China. And I think that Joe Biden sees this as the defining geopolitical issue of the age. And interestingly, you know, we talk about all the division in Washington. I think this is an issue where there is broad unity, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
John Sopel at the White House, thank you. So before we leave you tonight from the steps of the United Nations here in New York, let's recap an eventful day. The UN Secretary-General set the tone this morning with an ambitious agenda for this 76th gathering of the United Nations General Assembly. Antonio Guterres said the world was facing cascading crises from the pandemic to climate change and called on leaders to wake up and work together to combat mistrust. He was followed by a defiant Brazilian president who invited the world to come and see what he called the pristine Amazon, where deforestation, he claims, is being reduced. Jair Bolsonaro has been the talk of this gathering for turning up without being vaccinated against COVID in a breach of the UN's honour code, which relies on leaders to get the jab before speaking. And in his very first address to the UN General Assembly, President Biden outlined a US foreign policy vision rooted in global alliances, even as allies are still bruised by the messy US exit from Afghanistan. He also said he'd double the funds the US allocates to help developing nations deal with climate change. And matching that diplomatic tone and the generosity, China's President Xi reaffirmed a pledge of 2 billion vaccine doses for the world as he stressed the need for dialogue and cooperation between nations. And lest you think it's all power suits and mega speeches, the UN says that 1 million viewers tuned in to watch its live stream of BTS. On Monday, the Korean mega group promoted vaccines and thanked young people for their perseverance during the pandemic. Well, there you have it. I'm Laura Trevelyan. Thanks for watching BBC World News America.